Hey everybody, welcome to another video, and today we're going to be making America's #1 pizza topping. That's right, we're going to be making pepperoni. So stay tuned. There's a lot of steps and there's a lot to cover, but I'm sure you're going to be able to get it and you'll be making pepperoni in no time. This is the very first thing that we're going to get done here, and it's really get our mold set up and rehydrated and set to the side. And so this particular mold is called Penicillium nalgiavensis. It's known as mold 600 on the market, and what it is, it's the kind of mold that grows on the outside of the sausage while it's drying. It's going to offer protection against unwanted molds, number one. Number two, it's going to help in the increase of the pH right towards the end of the drying. It's also going to impart flavor, which is going to be unique to artisan salamis and pepperonis, and it's going to help in the drying process. It's going to slow the drying process down, which is going to allow your seasonings and your meat to really develop quite a bit. I'm only doing about 10 pounds of pepperoni, and so in about a quarter cup of water, I really only need about a quarter gram of this mold. And for every quarter gram of mold, I'm going to put a quarter gram of dextrose. And so I'm preparing this particular solution about 12 hours in advance, and so I'm kind of doing this the night before, and I'm going to set it to the side, leave it on the counter, and what's going to happen is this mold is going to rehydrate, and it's going to have the sugars there, it's going to have the food, and by the time I use it tomorrow, it's going to be alive and happy. You can purchase this mold online. I can post some of the websites here at the bottom, not a problem. But there's some great websites, the Sausage Maker and the Craft Butcher's Pantry, and all kinds of neat websites where you can get pretty much anything you need for sausages. This is the step that I like the most. This is where you get to create and really fine-tune the flavors of your pepperoni. I call this my laboratory. If you watch some of our other videos, you'll see that we've created some really extraordinary products with just new concepts when it comes to flavor and salami, and this is where you get the chance to do that. And so it all starts with the scale, though. You want to have an accurate scale that is precise, if you want to, especially if you want to have a consistent product. So this particular scale is a Mettler Toledo, but you can get a Taylor scale, and you can anyway. They make a lot of different really good scales that you can use. You want to get one that at least weighs to the 1/10 of a gram. That we thank Stanley Marianski for this recipe, and I thank Bob for giving me the tweaks necessary to make it just the kind of pepperoni that I've been looking for. And so what Bob did was he tweaked the dextrose and the starter culture and the anise, and now we have a pepperoni that is slightly tangy and really popping with flavor. So if you're new to salami and pepperoni making, if you've been bitten by the bug, welcome to the club. This is a great field to be in, and look, as soon as you think you've got it all figured out, you're going to read something that's just going to blow your mind, and you're going to think, wow, there is so much information out there. This recipe has paprika, cayenne, fennel. Now if you have any whole seeds that are going in your recipes, we suggest that you toast them first. That really brings the oils out, and then crack them a little bit. Run them through a mill, or smash them on the ground. That's my cure. I've also got some white pepper and some salt. You can tweak just about any of the ingredients in this recipe, with the exception of the cure and the salt. I really wouldn't mess with those two unless you really know what you're doing. You may end up with a product that's unsafe to eat. And so if you follow this recipe, which will be posted at the bottom, you are good to go, and you're going to have a pepperoni that you can be very proud of. So that is now my spice mix. What we've done is, remember, we've got our mold that's curing. I did that last night. My spice mix is already done. Now we get to figure out, how do I want to grind it? Now, pepperoni is generally ground fairly tiny, so I'm going to use a 4.5 millimeter plate. And you want to make sure that your knife is clean. You want to make sure that your plates are sharp and your knives are sharp. You also want to make sure that everything that you're using prior to using it is sanitized and disinfected. That's your first line of defense against unwanted bacteria. Remember, you're going to be fermenting this pork and then drying this pork for a matter of 8 weeks, give or take, depending. And you're doing it in an environment that's conducive to growing mold. And so you want to really make sure that you're growing the right kind of mold and not the wrong kind of mold. And so the right kind of mold for us is this Penicillium nalgiavensis, Bactofirm 600. And so you're going to see right here what I'm doing is I'm separating my meat according to my recipe. Now, this is a beef and pork and fat recipe. It's a fairly lean pepperoni, 15% fat. And so I use back fat, as you saw here earlier. I normally carry, 30, 40 pounds of back fat at a time, and that way I could just separate it and have it on hand. Now that means that everything else I use needs to be lean. I don't want to add any extra fat to my sausage right there around there, so I just want pure meat. I don't want anything undesirable, nothing I wouldn't eat myself. Cleaning it up really nice. Once I do that, I toss anything I'm not going to use. Actually, I'll give it to my dogs. and now we're going to clean up the pork. And so this particular cut that I'm using is the ham. You can use really any part that you want, but you have to be aware that each portion of the pig is going to come with its own section of fat. You have different classes of meat when you're referring to the beef and to pork. The belly is going to have a 50% fat to protein ratio. The shoulder, depending on the cut, you may have 30% fat, you may have 50% fat, you may have a lean cut. So I like this particular cut because where I live, pork is very expensive. This right here costs me about $3.50 a pound, and it's the cheaper of the cuts. And so we're going to use this because I can clean it up and I can get only the lean out of it, and that's what I'm looking for. I've got my fat, and I've got my beef, and I just want to pull all the lean out. So that means I'm going to have to do a lot of knife work cleaning this particular piece of pig up. Notice how I just roll this muscle right out. And then in between each one of the layers of the muscles, you're usually going to have a little bit of fat. You're going to have silver skin. You want to remove all that. Any tendons. You want to remove anything that's going to cause any kind of undesirable texture or taste. They sometimes put an off-putting taste whenever they dry, and so you just want to have the cleanest possible product by the time you go to grind it. This is all fresh. The pH of the meat is about 5.9 right now, and that's important to know because we can use that to test the end result. I knew that I was going to be making about 9 or 10 pounds, so I had an ideal number already, and so all I'm doing is I'm fulfilling my measurements. I think I needed like 2,300 grams or something like that worth of pork, and so I'm just going until I hit that number. At this point, we're just going to mix the three together. All three are going to get ground the exact same way, but what I need to do is I need to chill it. All right, this is fresh pork. It just came out of the fridge. It was just butchered yesterday. And so what I want to do is I want to get this nice and chilled. And so I'm going to wrap it in some saran wrap, and I'm going to pop it in the freezer. Depending how cold your freezer is, this may only take, 20 or 30 minutes, and it may take up to an hour, give or take. It also depends on the kind of grinder you're using. If you're using a commercial grinder, man, you can get this thing real nice and cold, 32, 33 degrees, and you're never going to have a problem. If you're using a KitchenAid grinder, you can't have it so cold because the KitchenAid motor is not that strong. And so you definitely want to have it as cold as possible, but not so cold where your grinder won't be able to handle it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this, pop it in the freezer, and in just 1 second, we'll be done. All right, the next step is the starter culture. Fermenting pepperoni requires some sort of starter culture. Now, there's a lot of different starter cultures out on the market. Notice right here, I don't need a lot of it. 1.135 grams is how much I need for roughly, 9 pounds, I think is what it is. 9 or 10 pounds. And so each starter culture has its own benefits depending on what you're trying to achieve. For me, the FLC is very versatile. You can use it as a fast ferment culture or a slow ferment culture. and it really depends on the amount of dextrose and the temperature at which you ferment. And so I'm using this particular culture because I want to have a little bit of tanginess to that pepperoni, and this is going to allow me to do it fairly quick and get that pH. All right, now that last little note on the culture, one thing to remember: when you rehydrate it, you don't want to put a lot of water. Roughly 2 tablespoons for every 5 pounds of meat is how much water you're going to use, and you want to let it rehydrate for roughly 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. Right there on the back where the arrow's pointing, that's my casings that are I'm getting ready. Casings are very simple. These are 61 millimeter synthetic casings. I can fit roughly 3 pounds of meat inside each one of them. So notice I've got my seasonings already mixed up, and now I'm going to go ahead and add my starter culture. And at this point, there's no stopping. All right. So by the time you add your starter culture and your seasonings, you're grinding, you're mixing, and you're stuffing. And so you don't want to lollygag too much around once you do this step, because you're starting to rehydrate all of your seasonings. So once you rehydrate your seasonings, you're creating an environment within your meat itself to have potential problems. And so you want to work quickly, you want to make sure that everything's cold, and you want to make sure that you get even distribution, especially with that starter culture. You can apply your starter culture hydrated like I did, or you can use it as a powder. You can just sprinkle it over your meat. If you're able to mix it well, that's not a problem also. One of the big problems that people typically have is distribution. So as long as you mix your meat really well, then distribution shouldn't be a problem. So at this point, I'm just going to grind it. Remember, we're using a 4.5 millimeter plate, and I'm working quick, and everything's cold. So my grinder, that grinder tray up there, the actual blade, the auger, the plate itself has all been in the freezer. And from time to time, I'm checking what's coming out just to make sure that nothing's smearing. The one thing you don't want is your fat to smear. When your fat smears, then your sausage is going to have a real tough time drying, and you're not going to have a very good quality sausage. So every tube, your grind should come out clean. Everything should look like its own independent tube. There we go. It should all be like spaghetti. That's really what it looks like. But if it's going to come out and it looks like it's it looks like it's already chewed up, well, then you may want to take it all apart and see if there's any sinew or anything clogging up the knife. In this case, I'm using my stand mixer to mix the meat and the pepperoni. And in the last couple days, I've actually had an opportunity to use this thing several times, and I quite like the way it works. So if you happen to have a KitchenAid with a paddle attachment, it's going to do the exact same thing. Notice after about 5 minutes, 6 minutes of mixing, the texture of the meat has changed. It's very tacky. When you grab it, it's going to stick to your hands. That's generally how you know that it's done. And so you don't want to overmix it, but you certainly don't want to undermix it. Generally, about 6 to 8 minutes, you're in good time. Now we are stuffing, and in today's pepperoni, I'm using a 25-pound sausage stuffer, and I'm pounding it in there. Right? You want to just kind of throw it in there and lop it in there so that it really compresses. You don't want any air pockets. If you're using a KitchenAid, work in small batches. Work quickly. You don't want to heat the meat up. All right, and so like I said earlier, we're using synthetic sausage casings. You could use beef middles, which is a good one as well for pepperoni. This is 61 millimeter. I like the size. And what we're doing is we're just going to go ahead and tie them all off. And so you want to get these things as tight as possible. When I fill them, I leave the nozzle about 2 inches in while the meat is being pressed through, so that it just doesn't leave any room for air pockets to form. And it also gives me a real nice tight fit. This is also going to help the meat stick together, help bind together during the drying process. All right, I'm going to slow this down for you right quick so you can take a peek. Now, what we're doing is we're tying the underside of the pepperoni. This is going to be the part that's hanging on the bottom. And so imagine if you're using a natural casings, which they're very slippery, especially when they're wet, those knots don't hold very well. So what you want to do is you want to ensure that you tie a knot and your filling doesn't come falling out all over the place. And so what we're doing is we're tying just a basic knot, kind of like you would tie your shoes. All right, so I did one on the front, I came back around, I'm doing another one on the back end. And then the excess of my casing I'm going to fold over just slightly, and I'm going to create basically like a hitch. All right, I'm going to create an area in which it's going to hold itself. And that right there is going to keep the weight of the sausage inside, and it's going to keep it from falling out. So that also works. There's also something called a bubble knot, which is really great as well, which helps displace the weight of the sausage. That was not a bubble knot. That was a different kind of knot. I don't know what you call that knot. All right, so like I said, each one of these, they'll fit about 3 pounds. And you're going to notice we're going to have a little bit of meat left over. A little bit of meat left over. And we're going to save that because we're going to need to test our pH while our pepperonis are fermenting. And rather than disturb the pepperoni, we're just going to ferment this little extra meat alongside with it. So here's where we get to test the, check to see if there's any air pockets, poke holes in the sausage. This is going to allow for good airflow. This is going to make sure that there's no unwanted spaces for bacteria to grow. That little container of liquid right there on the left is hydrogen peroxide, and so I just pop that in there, and it keeps it nice and sterile. Okay. Finally, before fermentation, we're going to put our Penicillium nalgiavensis. Now, if you want to smoke your salami, go ahead and smoke it. Traditional Italian salami is not smoked, but you can. You could take it at this stage. You could pop it in your smoker. What I would do is I would cold smoke it, and I would make sure that it stays under about 65 degrees. But now it's time to ferment. If you do cold smoke it, don't apply your mold until after it's smoked. Okay. Right here, we had an issue with our chamber earlier, so we had to make some quick adjustments. And what I decided to do was use my smoker instead. And you're going to see how I rigged it up. Now, this is a temperature control by Inkbird, the green one, and that blue one is a humidity control. It's a hygrostat. The reason I have a temperature control is to check the temperature of the smoker itself. The smoker has the capability of going relatively low, 75 degrees Fahrenheit. So in theory, the smoker by itself should take care of business, but I wasn't completely confident that it would get to the right temperature. So I'll put a temperature control. The humidity control is going to give me added humidity inside this box. So notice right there, I just had the setting for 80 degrees. There it is, 80 degrees Fahrenheit for 36 hours. And that's going to give me an opportunity to have this thing on and go to bed without worrying it's going to come on. Basically, a fermentation chamber is simply a box with humidity and some sort of a heating element. In this case, if you're fermenting at low temperatures, then it's basically a box with some sort of a cooling element. I'm just monitoring the humidity and the temperature, and for this particular sausage, I'm going to be fermenting it at 80 degrees until I get to a pH of 4.9 or 4.8. So there's the extra meat. That's the meat we're going to use to test here in just a minute. And I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so 12 hours later, it is time to test the pH. And I want to say it's about 10 o'clock in the morning. If you happen to have a pH meter, you're already a step ahead of the game. This is such an incredible tool when making pepperoni or when making salamis, because what you're able to do is you're really able to fine-tune the exact moment in which you want to pull your salami out of fermentation and into drying. And with pH strips, it's just very difficult to do that. You can do it, and people do it, although your results are not going to be very consistent. But you will end up with a product that I'm sure you're going to love. It's going to be amazing. You just want to make sure you get the pH strips that are in the tenths of the decimals. 5.1, 5.2. Don't get the whole number pH strips. 5, 6, 7, things like that. Milwaukee, Hanna, these are manufacturers of different pH meters. These pH meters are incredibly sensitive, and when you're cleaning them, you don't want to touch the probe. You want to be very careful with them. Follow the manufacturer's cleaning instructions so that you can get a lot of life out of them. They're not very cheap, and so you want to make sure you take care of them. If you take care of them, they're going to last a long time. Before I do any testing of the meat, I want to calibrate the unit. And so I'm using a 2-point calibration right now, 7.01 and 4.01. And that's just going to give me the most accurate results, because what I'm looking for is a tangy salami. If I let the pH go too low, 4.6, 4.5, then I'm going to get a real sour salami. That's not going to be very pleasant to eat. If the pH is too high, I'm not going to get tangy at all. And it's going to be delicious. It's just not going to be tangy. And so I want to have mine honed in at somewhere between 4.78 to 4.9, somewhere in that range. And so 12 hours into it, 10 a.m. in the morning, here we go. All right, we're not quite there yet. I love doing this, by the way, guys. This is such an incredible art. This is if you've gotten hooked on fermented sausages. Okay, we're at 5.41. We're going to pop it back in the chamber. If you are new to salami, welcome. This is such an incredible hobby. It's a great business. It's a wonderful thing to learn, and trust me, there is an incredible amount of information out there in regards to this age-old practice of curing and drying meats. And so what I suggest is get your hands on a couple really good books. Stanley Marianski's got a whole slew of great books. Michael Ruhlman's got some great books. Join a forum. There's plenty of forums out there that you can ask other people great questions in regards to making salamis, making pepperonis, making dry cured sausages. All right, so it's 10 o'clock at night. It wasn't ready yet. I had to wait another 5 hours. And at this point, we're going to test it again. So this is the third time I'm testing it. It's been 27 hours. And there we go. 4.79, so perfect. And I wish you could smell this. I'm not even kidding. This smells so amazing. There's that. You can smell the anise, you can smell the fennel, the cayenne. Look at this before picture, and then there's the after. And so you can start to see the color of the meat really redden up, and that's thanks to the cure. That's thanks to the starter culture that we put in there, and also a little bit of the seasonings, the paprika and the cayenne. You can also notice, if you pay real close attention, the mold Bactofirm 600, that's starting to grow on the outside. That's that Penicillium nalgiavensis. That's just going to get thicker and thicker each day that passes. If you happen to notice that it gets, you start to have an ammonia smell inside your chamber, just lower the temperature of your chamber by a couple degrees, and that should fix that problem. That's just the gases being released by this particular mold, and so it's nothing to worry about. The parameters and how we're going to be drying pepperoni is 55 degrees and Fahrenheit at 80% humidity. And that's going to be for the duration of the entire time that it's drying. I like to do it that way, although it takes a little bit longer. You're going to get a much better product. It's going to be incredibly well developed. You're not going to get that dreaded case hardening. You definitely don't want that. Case hardening is where the outside of your pepperoni dries faster than the inside of your pepperoni, leaving the inside way too wet, moist, and sometimes riddled with bacteria. Day 5, notice how the mold is really taken over. That looks really great. When your salami is done drying, when your pepperoni is done drying, you're going to peel that off You're going to wash it down real good, and you're going to slice it nice and thin and put it on your Italian subs, on your pizzas. You can cook it inside your pasta, and it's ready to eat. And so typically at about 30% it's ready, but it's going to be very soft. My target weight is about 42% weight lost. And so you be the judge. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video on how to make pepperoni. There's a lot of steps, but if you follow each one diligently, you write everything down, you work in a clean environment, you're going to end up with a great product. If you got any questions, let me know, and thanks a lot for watching.